Welcome, listeners, to another descent into the shadows. Settle in, pull your blankets a little tighter, and lock your doors. We all know the night shift, the graveyard hours. It's a time when the rest of the civilized world is tucked away in their beds, dreaming. But for a select few, the security guards, the gig workers, the fast food employees, the hours between midnight and dawn are a stark, waking reality. The night changes things. The air gets colder, the silence gets heavier, and the boundaries between safety and absolute terror begin to blur. Tonight, we are exploring for harrowing tales from the people who keep the world turning while the rest of us sleep, for isolated souls who discovered exactly what, or who, is waiting out there in the dark. Our first story takes us to the greasy, neon-lit perimeter of a late-night Dr. Through. Tale 1. The Midnight Benefactor. Thomas was 24 years old, just a regular guy trying to make ends meet. He spent his days playing video games and his nights bathed in the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of a local fast food franchise. For 2 years he had worked the late shift, 0 p.m. to 4, 0 a.m. He considered himself a night owl, so the grueling hours didn't grind him down the way they might break someone else. It was a quiet existence. Unremarkable. Safe. Or so he thought. The descent into paranoia began with an utterly mundane transaction. It was past midnight, and the restaurant was skeleton crude, leaving Thomas completely alone at the drive-through window. A car rolled up to the speaker box. The voice crackling through the cheap intercom was male, flat, and entirely unmemorable. He ordered a large double cheeseburger combo and a soda. Right. When the vehicle pulled up to the first window, Thomas noticed the heavy, pitch-black tint on the windows. The driver only rolled the glass down an inch or two, just enough to push a credit card through the narrow gap. Thomas processed the payment, slid the card and the receipt back into the darkness of the vehicle, and turned to prepare the bags. But when he looked back, the car was gone. The driver hadn't pulled forward to the second window to collect his food. He had simply driven away into the night. Thomas stood there for several minutes, the warm bag of food in his hands, staring out at the empty asphalt, expecting the taillights to circle back around. They never did. Shrugging it off as the bizarre behavior of a late-night wanderer, Thomas eventually set the bag aside and ate the meal himself. 7 days later, the exact same scenario played out. The same flat voice on the intercom, the same heavy burger combo, the same tinted window rolling down just an inch to pay. And, once again, the driver vanished before collecting his food. Thomas chuckled to himself. It was bizarre, sure. But he didn't connect the sinister threads weaving themselves around him. It wasn't until the third identical encounter that the cold reality dawned on him. This was the same man, performing the same inexplicable ritual. Thomas realized something highly unusual was happening, but he chose to look the other way. After all, a stranger was essentially buying him a free, hot dinner every few nights. This bizarre routine became the rhythm of his late shifts. Every 4 or 5 days, between the desolate hours of 1, 0 and 3, ghost in the tinted car would purchase a meal and vanish. Thomas actually began to anticipate the visits. Then came the night that shattered his reality. It was 0 a.m. The familiar crackle of the speaker box echoed in the empty restaurant. The flat voice ordered the usual meal. Thomas smiled, already anticipating his free dinner. But then, the voice lingered on the intercom. The static hissed, and the man said something that made the blood freeze in Thomas' veins. I hope you've been enjoying those burgers, Mr. Hurley. Thomas stopped breathing. His last name was Hurley. He did not wear a name tag that displayed his surname. His full name was not printed on receipts, nor was it posted anywhere a customer could possibly see it. There was absolutely no logical way this faceless stranger, sitting in the dark drive-through lane, could know his identity. Panic seized him. Thomas grabbed the headset, stammering, demanding to know who was there. He frantically asked, "Who is this?" over and over into the microphone. Silence. The driver didn't even pull up to the window to pay this time. Thomas heard the deep, guttural rev of an engine, and the car sped off into the night. For the remainder of his shift, Thomas was a prisoner to his own terror. Every shadow outside the window looked like a threat, but the true horror was waiting for him when he finally clocked out and went home. As he approached his front door, he noticed a small piece of paper resting on his welcome mat. It was a handwritten note. The scrawled letters read, "I know what you did. You have 3 days." Thomas felt physically ill. His hands trembled as he stared at the paper. Wait, what had he done? He was a 24-year-old fast food worker who played video games on his days off. He had no dark secrets, no hidden enemies, no underground debts. He spent that entire night sitting rigid on his living room couch, every light in the house blazing, waiting for a monster that never came. But the stalker was merely playing with his food. The very next night, the tinted car returned to the drive-thru. There was no burger order this time. The flat voice simply instructed Thomas to write down an address. It was a remote location on the absolute fringes of the town. Before Thomas could even process the demand, the voice delivered an ultimatum. Thomas had exactly 48 hours to deliver $10,000 in cash to that address. Then, the car peeled away. Thomas was practically vibrating with fear. $10,000. He barely had enough in his checking account to cover rent. He couldn't pay it, and he refused to go to that isolated address. He convinced himself it was an elaborate, cruel prank orchestrated by someone he knew. He decided to ignore the extortion. It was a fatal mistake. 3 agonizing nights passed. Thomas began to let his guard down. He was sitting in his living room, watching television, trying to convince himself the nightmare was over. Suddenly, a deafening crash ruptured the quiet of his home. Glass exploded inward. Thomas threw himself to the floor, his survival instincts screaming that he was under gunfire. He laid there, heart hammering against his ribs, waiting for the next shot. When silence reclaimed the room, he cautiously raised his head. A large, jagged rocks, and amidst a glittering sea of shattered glass, on his living room rug. By the time he peered out the broken window, the street was entirely empty. He finally called the police. He handed over the note, the address, and the terrifying timeline. The authorities investigated the remote drop-off location, but found nothing. They promised extra patrols, but without security camera footage, their hands were illegally tied. Thomas is now trapped in a waking nightmare. He has called out sick from work for days, terrified to leave his home, yet equally terrified to stay inside it. The predator knows where he walks. The predator knows where he sleeps. And Thomas has absolutely no idea why he has been marked for ruin. Tale 2. The Detour. Our next story takes us away from the city lights, out onto the desolate, winding roads that snake through the forgotten outskirts of civilization. The narrator of this tale was a recent college graduate, armed with a communications degree that proved utterly useless in the job market. He moved back in with his parents to scrape together some cash and a shred of dignity. He took up driving for a ride-share app. It wasn't a career, but the late-night weekend shifts, ferrying intoxicated college students home from the downtown bars, provided a decent surge of income. It was a Saturday night, pushing 1:30 a.m. He was exhausted, his eyes gritty from staring at the dark asphalt. He was seconds away from logging off the app when one final ride request pinged. The pickup was downtown, but the drop-off was a brutal distance away, deep past the edge of the suburbs. The fare was lucrative, so, despite his fatigue, he accepted. The passenger was a quiet, unassuming young woman. The 40-minute drive was entirely uneventful. But when he finally dropped her off, it was past 2. Audi found himself completely isolated in the rural darkness. Night. No street light, no houses, just dense, looming woods and a long Dr. B highway. He turned the car around and began the solitary trek home. Roughly 10 minutes into the drive, his headlights illuminated a chilling sight. Sitting dead in the center of the narrow, two-lane road was a parked car. Its hazard lights blinked in a slow, rhythmic, amber pulse. As he approached, he saw 2 figures standing in front of the vehicle, frantically waving their arms. Every self-preservation instinct the driver possessed screamed at him to press the accelerator and fly past them. The isolation of the road practically begged for a roadside ambush, but his conscience gnawed at him. He couldn't just abandon stranded motorists in the middle of the night. Against his better judgment, he slowed to a halt, keeping a safe distance of 20 feet between his bumper and the strangers. He cracked his window just a fraction of an inch, enough to hear, but too narrow for a hand to reach inside. The strangers were a middle-aged couple. Their presence somewhat eased his racing heart, but the moment the woman began to speak, a deep, primal unease washed over him. Her energy was manic, almost theatrical, but beneath the frantic gestures, her words felt Mervingwam rehearsed, as if she were reading lines from a script. She breathlessly warned him that the main bridge, just a few miles ahead, had completely collapsed earlier that afternoon. She claimed they had nearly plunged their own vehicle into the churning river below. The husband quickly chimed in, pointing a trembling finger toward the dark woods. He told the driver about a hidden turnoff just a mile up the road. It was an unmarked dirt path that cut directly through the dense forest. He promised that while it would add significant time to the journey, it was the only way to bypass the destroyed bridge and safely reach the main highway. The driver thanked them, rolled up his window, and accelerated. As he drove away, a heavy, suffocating dread settled in the cabin of his car. Something about the encounter was deeply wrong. Why hadn't there been any road closure signs? Why were they parked in the middle of the street instead of on the shoulder? He decided to trust his gut. He was not going to take a detour into the pitch-black woods, based on the frantic advice of 2 phantoms. A mile later, his headlights caught the exact turn-off the husband had described. It was a paved wound in the tree line, barely wide enough for a single vehicle, instantly swallowed by the absolute darkness of the forest. The driver kept his foot on the gas and blew right past it. Minutes later, he arrived at the bridge. He slowed down, bracing for a barricade or a gaping chasm. The bridge was perfectly intact. There was no damage, no collapse, no police tape. He drove across the concrete span without a single issue and reached the highway safely. The driver made it home, but sleep evaded him. His mind raced with terrifying scenarios. What would have happened if he had turned his wheels onto that dark dirt path? Who was waiting in those woods? Days later, the agonizing curiosity overpowered his fear. He made a foolish decision. He got back into his car and drove out to that remote stretch of road. This time, the sun was high in the sky. The bright daylight stripped the landscape of its nocturnal menace, making him feel a little less insane for returning. He retraced his exact route. The middle-aged couple and their broken-down car were nowhere to be seen. When he reached the dirt turnoff, he slowed to a crawl and pulled onto the shoulder. His breath caught in his throat. Nailed crudely to the thick trunk of an oak tree at the very entrance of the path was a freshly painted wooden sign. It read, "Dead End." That sign had absolutely not been there the night of his drive. Even in the dark, his headlights would have illuminated the bright paint. Someone had hammered it into the wood within the last few days. He sat in the idling car, staring down the dirt path. In the daylight, it looked harmless, just a tight, overgrown trail. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the vehicle, intending to walk just a few yards and to see where it led. The moment his boots crunched on the gravel, a wave of profound, paralyzing dread slammed into him. The air felt heavy. The woods were utterly, unnaturally silent. Not a bird chirping, not a leaf rustling. The driver stood frozen at the threshold of the path, his body physically refusing to walk into the tree line. He decided to listen to his instincts. He pivoted on his heel, reaching for the door handle of his car. And then, the silence of the forest was violently shattered. From deep within the labyrinth of trees, echoing down that narrow dirt path, came a scream. It was a woman's voice, a shrill, agonizing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. The driver didn't freeze. He didn't investigate. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the car into drive, and tore away from the woods, his tires spitting gravel in his desperate flight. He never went back. He has no idea who the couple was, or what trap they were trying to spring. But the echo of that woman's scream still haunts his quietest moments. Tale 3. The Night Watchman. Our third story shifts from the vulnerability of the open road to the claustrophobic terror of being locked inside a massive, empty building. The narrator was 26 years old, earning a paycheck by working overnight security at a sprawling commercial warehouse complex. The hours were brutal, 11. Like 0 p.m. to 7. Late 0 a.m. He was the sole human being on the entire property. The facility was located in a desolate industrial park on the frozen fringe of a small city. The job was painfully monotonous. Clock in, walk the freezing exterior perimeter, retreat to the heated security office, stare at a wall of closed-circuit monitors, repeat every hour until dawn. The warehouse stored bulk industrial supplies, nothing of extreme value, making the necessity of an overnight guard feel almost redundant. It was the dead of winter. A thick, silent snow was blanketing the industrial park, wrapping the complex in a muffled, freezing isolation. The guard completed his initial midnight patrol, finding all the exterior bay doors locked, tightened the property secure. He settled into his rolling chair in the office, sipping awful coffee. At 1. Light 0 a.m. The digital chime of a motion alert pulled his eyes to the monitors. It was a camera pointing at the exterior loading docks. The guard leaned in, scanning the black and white feed. The dock was completely empty. Only the heavy, swirling snow danced through the floodlights. He chalked it up to the sensitive system reacting to the heavy weather. But the alerts didn't stop. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the system chimed. The same camera, over and over. Each time he checked, the dock was deserted. But a creeping unease began to take root in his chest. The motion on the screen always seemed to trigger right at the very edge of the camera's frame. A fleeting shadow, a glitch of pixels, as if something was purposely pacing just outside the lens's field of vision, teasing the sensor. By 2:30 a.m., he had received 7 alerts. No other cameras on the property were whipping. Right. 0 a.m., he decided to investigate. He zipped his parka, grabbed his heavy flashlight, and stepped out into the freezing night. The snowfall had slowed to a powder, and the industrial park was draped in a heavy, suffocating silence. He swept his flashlight beam across the loading docks. The massive steel bay doors were padlocked. More importantly, the snow covering the concrete dock was absolutely pristine. Aside from his own fresh boots, there wasn't a single footprint to be seen. No one had been out there. He retreated to the warmth of the office, deeply unnerved. 20 minutes later, the silence of the warehouse was violated. It was a harsh, agonizing sound. A loud, metallic screech, like something incredibly heavy was being dragged across the rock concrete floor. The noise originated from deep within the belly of the 80,000 square foot warehouse. The guard's blood ran cold. He frantically clicked through the interior camera feeds. Aisle 1, empty. Aisle 2, empty. Aisles 3, 4, and 5, all completely devoid of life. He desperately tried to rationalize the noise. Maybe the wind was causing the metal roof to flex. and are crawled by an agonizing tension. Light. Then, the noise returned. This time, it was drastically louder. The metallic scrape was immediately followed by a violently loud bang, echoing like a sledgehammer striking one of the heavy steel interior doors. The guard's eyes darted to the monitors. Camera 6, the feed pointing toward the rear of the facility, was dead. The square screen was a block of deep black static. 3 agonizing seconds passed. Like, the feed snapped back to life. But the image had changed. The angle of the camera was wrong. It had been physically shifted several degrees to the left. Someone, or something, had just reached up and manually twisted the lens. He had no choice. He was a security guard. He unholstered his radio, gripped his heavy flashlight like a club, and stepped out of the office and onto the sprawling warehouse floor. The interior was a cavernous labyrinth of towering industrial shelving. The overhead lights whirred, into a sickly, jaundiced yellow, leaving the deep recesses of the aisles drowning in absolute darkness. The guard walked slowly down the central artery of the warehouse, his boots barely making a sound on the concrete. He was roughly halfway through the massive space when he stopped dead in his tracks. To his left, echoing from 2 aisles over, came the unmistakable rhythm of human footsteps. Click, click, click. The guard froze. The moment he stopped walking, the footsteps in the dark parallel stopped instantly. He stood there, enveloped in a crushing silence, hardly daring to breathe. He waited for the phantom walker to make a move. The tension was paralyzing. Unable to bear the psychological torture any longer, the guard summoned every ounce of forced bravado he possessed. His voice echoed through the cavernous space. "Security, I know you're in here. Come out with your hands visible." The silence that answered him was deafening. He spent the remainder of his patrol gripping his flashlight with white knuckles, clearing every single aisle, jumping at every shadow cast by the towering shelves. He braced for a violent ambush around every corner. He found absolutely nothing. The warehouse was completely empty. He retreated to the locked office and watched the monitors until the morning sun finally broke over the snowy horizon. When the facility manager arrived at 7:00 a.m., the guard reported the terrifying breach. A full maintenance sweep of the building was conducted. Night. They found no first entry, no broken locks, no tampered alarms. The managers looked at the young guard with barely concealed skepticism, clearly believing he had fallen asleep and dreamed the entire ordeal. But he knows what he heard. He knows the camera moved. And he knows with absolute terrifying certainty that he was not alone in the dark that night. Tale 4, The Marathon. Our final story ventures into a place built for self-improvement and health, transformed by the night shift into a theater of surreal, visceral horror. The narrator had taken a gap year between high school and college. To pass the time and earn some cash, he picked up the graveyard shift at a local 24-hour gym. The facility operated on an automated, keycard entry system, meaning during the witching hours, he was entirely alone at the front desk. His responsibilities were minimal: monitor the cameras, wipe down the equipment, and occasionally chat with the nocturnal regulars. It was a rough neighborhood, but the clientele was generally respectful. On this particular night, the young employee was scheduled from 8:00 p.m. to 6:00 a.m. It was an agonizingly slow, deeply boring shift. By 2:00 a.m., the gym was practically deserted. He had finished his cleaning rounds and collapsed into the office chair, staring blearily at the grid of security monitors. A few familiar insomniacs trickled in and out, swiping their cards and hitting the weights. His eyes caught movement in the far corner of the cardio section. A man was on one of the treadmills. The employee didn't recognize him, which wasn't entirely unusual, But there was something immediately alarming about the man's behavior. He was running at an incredibly high speed. The employee pulled up the digital equipment dashboard on his computer. The man had the treadmill cranked to an aggressive 9 miles per hour. Right, that alone was impressive. But what child the employee was the duration? 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The man never slowed down. He never touched the controls. The employee leaned closer to the monitor, zooming in on the camera feed. The runner was a grotesque sight. He was dressed in filthy, ragged clothing. His long matted hair whipped wildly around his face. But the most terrifying detail was his expression. The man's face was completely paralyzed, a stone cold, emotional as his mask. He wasn't panting. He wasn't grimacing in exertion. He was simply staring dead ahead into the blank wall. The employee's eyes dropped to the running belt. What? The man was completely barefoot. He had been sprinting on the abrasive, textured belt of a treadmill at 9 miles an hour for over 15 minutes, with absolutely no footwear. The employee felt a knot of dread twist in his stomach. The man was now the only other living soul inside the massive building. Despite the fear clawing at his chest, the employee knew he had to enforce the facility's strict footwear policy. He used it as an excuse to confront the bizarre intruder. He stood up, walked out of the safety of the office, and navigated the labyrinth of weight machines toward the cardio corner. The treadmill was positioned just outside a narrow employee hallway. As the young man rounded the corner, his heart completely stopped. The back of the treadmill was painted in a thick, wet smear of crimson. The runner's bare feet were literally tearing themselves apart against the high-speed friction of the belt. Blood. Blood was not merely dripping. It was actively splattering against the plastic housing in the surrounding floor with every violent, agonizing footfall. Yet, the runner's face remained a mask of absolute apathy. He stared straight ahead into the void. His mouth was hinged wide open in a silent, unnatural gape. He looked completely detached from reality, numb to the horrific physical trauma he was inflicting upon his own body. The employee was paralyzed by a mixture of revulsion and sheer terror. Every instinct told him the man was deeply unstable and exceptionally dangerous. But he had to stop the machine. "Hey!" The employee yelled, his voice cracking over the loud, rhythmic thud of the bloody feet hitting the belt. "Stop the machine." The light. The man did not flinch. He didn't turn his head. He just kept sprinting, his mouth hanging open like a corpse. He looked. "Light, what are you doing?" "Stop." "Light." The employee screamed louder. Slowly, without breaking his sprint, the man spoke. His voice was a guttural, rasping whisper that somehow cut straight through the noise of the gym. It was the coldest sound the young man had ever heard. "Are you there?" He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't in pain. The employee yelled at him to stop again. The man simply repeated the chilling phrase, his voice devoid of humanity. "Are you there?" The pool of blood pooling at the base of the machine was expanding rapidly. The employee backed away slowly, terrified that sudden movement might trigger an attack. He turned and bolted back to the front office, desperate to call the police. He threw himself into the desk chair and grabbed the phone receiver. Before he dialed the emergency number, he cast a frantic glance at the security monitors to see if the man was pursuing him. The image on the screen made him drop the phone. The runner was no longer staring at the blank wall. He had turned his head. He was sprinting at 9 miles an hour, bleeding profusely, with his jaw unhinged, staring directly into the lens of the security camera. He was looking right at the employee. Suddenly, a blood-curdling sound erupted from the gym floor. It wasn't words. It was a primal, deafening shriek of pure, unadulterated madness. On the monitor, the man violently leapt off the moving treadmill, not bothering to hit the stop button, and sprinted out of the camera's view. The employee frantically clicked through the camera feeds, his hands shaking violently. Waits area. Empty. Locker rooms empty. Lobby empty. The madman had vanished from the grid. There was only one camera left to check. The employee hallway. The young man clicked the feed. The bloody runner was standing perfectly still, less than 6 feet away from the closed door of the security office. The employee lunged out of his chair and threw the deadbolt on the office door just a fraction of a second before the heavy brass doorknob began to violently grate. The employee scrambled backward, punching 911 into his cell phone. Outside the thin wooden door, the man began to scream again. He threw his bloody weight against the frame, shaking the entire wall. The dispatcher's voice crackled in the employee's ear, promising that cruisers were 5 minutes away. The employee huddled in the farthest corner of the office, trapped in a cage of his own making, listening to the relentless, inhuman shrieking echoing through the door. The sound was so deep, so guttural, it barely registered as human. The assault on the door continued for 3 agonizing, endless minutes. The young man squeezed his eyes shut, certain the wood was going to splinter and give way to a monster. And then, just as suddenly as the madness began, it stopped. The screaming ceased. The doorknob went still. The employee slowly opened his eyes and checked the hallway monitor. The corridor was empty. He systematically checked every camera in the facility. The bleeding man was gone. When the police finally arrived, they had to coax the terrified employee out of the office. They conducted a massive, sweeping search of the gym and the surrounding perimeter. They found the blood-soaked treadmill. They found the crimson footprints leading into the hallway. But the runner had evaporated into the night. The young man handed over his keys, quit his job the very next morning, and has never set foot inside a 24-hour gym since. He still lies awake at night, staring at his ceiling, haunted by the rasping voice asking, "Are you there?" and wondering what horrific fate would have befallen him if he hadn't thrown that deadbolt in time. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you turn off your lights and drift off to sleep, spare a thought for the night shift. For the people sitting in lonely offices, staring out into the pitch-black woods, and watching the security monitors. Because out there, in the dark, you never truly know who is watching back. Stay safe, listeners, and keep your doors locked. All have a fundamental expectation of safety within our own homes. The front door is a barrier against the chaotic, unpredictable world outside. But what happens when that barrier fails? What happens when the terror isn't lurking on a dark street corner, but waiting for you in the very space where you are supposed to be safe? Tonight, we are descending into the dark. We are exploring the most vulnerable, unsettling space in any home, the basement. Here are 4 terrifying, true accounts of subterranean horrors that will make you think twice before turning off the lights. The Stranger in the Maze. At 24, securing your first house is a milestone. It's a symbol of independence. For this young homeowner, the house was perfect. It was a solid, middle-class build with a sprawling, uniquely partitioned basement. The previous owners had carved the subterranean space into distinct sections using rough plywood and exposed framing. There was a main landing, a dedicated laundry area, a makeshift workshop, and a deep, cavernous storage room in the back. It was a maze. You couldn't stand in one spot and see the entire basement. When he first heard the house, he thought this quirky layout was cool. He wouldn't think so for long. It was a quiet weeknight, roughly 8 months after HED moved in. He needed to run a load of laundry, the only chore that ever forced him down those wooden stairs. As he opened the basement door, a subtle wave of confusion hit him. The basement lights were already on. The bulbs were ancient, yellow incandescent that cast a sickly, dim glow over the concrete. He distinctly remembered being down there days ago, but he simply assumed he had forgotten to hit the switch. He brushed the thought aside and began his descent. Things escalated with a violent suddenness that defied logic. He reached the bottom step. He turned toward the laundry section, and that is when a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision made his heart stop. He snapped his head to the side. Crouching in the dim, yellow light, attempting to hide behind a cheap folding table, was a man. The homeowner locked eyes with the intruder. The sheer impossibility of the moment paralyzed him. The man staring back at him was filthy, looking as though he had literally dragged himself out of a city sewer. The stare he leveled at the homeowner was pure, unadulterated malice. For a second that stretched into an eternity, neither of them moved. Then, the intruder bolted. But he didn't run toward the stairs. He plunged deeper into the maze, disappearing into the dark, partitioned rooms in the back of the basement. The movement shattered the homeowner's paralysis. Pure survival instinct kicked in, and he began backpedaling toward the safety of the stairs. But he was too slow. Before his foot could touch the first step, every single light in the basement was violently extinguished. Complete, suffocating darkness swallowed him whole. He had never been down there without the lights. The blackness was absolute. Disoriented and panicked, he scrambled for the stairs, blindly trusting his memory of the room's layout. He misjudged the distance. His foot caught on something, and he crashed hard onto the concrete floor. The fall scrambled his senses. The chaos in his brain was deafening. His phone was sitting on the kitchen counter upstairs. He was trapped in a pitch-black maze with a predator. Desperation breeds strange ideas. Thinking he could intimidate the intruder, the homeowner opened his mouth and began screaming at the top of his lungs, trying to project absolute, unhinged insanity. It was a catastrophic mistake. From the deep blackness on the other side of the basement, a voice answered him. The intruder began screaming back. But this wasn't a scream of fear. It was a guttural, terrifying roar of aggression. The sound reverberated off the concrete walls. He legitimately sounded like a murderer. The homeowner snapped his mouth shut. The intruder immediately fell silent. The lethal game of cat and mouse began. The homeowner dragged himself along the wall, navigating the maze entirely by touch. And then, he heard it. The soft, deliberate scuff of shoes on concrete. The intruder was moving, too. And the sounds were getting closer. He knows my basement better than I do. The thought was a spike of ice in his veins. He heard heavy, ragged breathing directly behind him. Blind panic took the wheel. He flailed his arms until his fingers finally grazed the wooden base of the staircase. He grabbed the railing and lunged upward. Before his foot could hit the second step, a vice-like grip clamped down on his ankle. The homeowner lost his balance, his head cracking violently against the wooden railing as he was dragged backward down onto the concrete floor. The intruder's strength was terrifying, almost inhuman. He was pulling him away from the stairs, deeper into the dock. Thrashing wildly, fighting for his life, the homeowner delivered a desperate, blind kick into the blackness. His heel connected solidly with bone. The grip on his ankle faltered for a fraction of a second. It was all the time he needed. He twisted his body violently, broke free, and scrambled up the stairs on his hands and knees. The intruder erupted into furious screaming below him. The homeowner burst through the door into the kitchen and slammed it shut. But the terror washed over. The door had no lock. He threw his entire body weight against the wood. Seconds later, heavy footsteps thundered up the basement stairs, followed immediately by a massive, violent crash against the other side of the door. The wood groaned, bowing inward for a terrifying second before the homeowner shoved it back into the frame. The intruder began a relentless, rhythmic assault on the door. The homeowner ripped off his socks for better traction, digging his bare heels into the kitchen floor, knowing with absolute certainty that if the door gave way, he was a dead man. Miraculously, the wood held. After what felt like hours, the assault stopped. Footsteps retreated back down into the basement. The homeowner dove for his phone on the counter, sprinting back to press his weight against the door while dialing 911. When the police finally cleared the house, the intruder had vanished. They discovered a small basement window that had been pried open from the outside. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the broken window. The police noted that not a single item in the house had been stolen. Furthermore, the light switch for the basement was hidden in a very obscure, non-intuitive location. The intruder had known exactly where to find it in the dark to cut the power. The police delivered a chilling hypothesis. The intruder wasn't there to burgle the house. He had been secretly living in the deep recesses of that maze-like basement for an undetermined amount of time. The homeowner broke his lease and moved out for months later. To this day, he is haunted by a single, terrifying conviction. The man living beneath his feet was fully prepared to kill him that night. And if that blind kick hadn't landed, he absolutely would have. The Flash in the Dark. Our next story dials the clock back roughly 2 decades. The narrator was 14 years old, entering that precarious age where parents finally trust you to stay home alone. His parents were driving out of state for a wedding. The original plan dictated that his college-aged sister, who lived only an hour away, would come down to supervise. But the moment the parents' car pulled out of the driveway, the sister texted to announce she was ditching him for a college party. The 14-year-old didn't care. He was thrilled. He lived in a classic, two-story house nestled in a painfully quiet, family-oriented suburban neighborhood. He didn't bother ratting his sister out. He was ready for a weekend of uninterrupted freedom. He spent the first 6 hours doing exactly what any 14-year-old boy would do, aggressively playing Halo on the living room television. It wasn't until just past midnight that the illusion of safety began to fracture. Sprawled on the couch, the boy heard a faint, rhythmic sound. Tap. Wake. Tap. Like. Tap, tap. It was coming from the backyard, striking the exterior siding of the house. He dismissed it immediately. It sounded exactly like a stray tree branch being pushed by the wind. He settled back into his game. A few minutes later, the sound returned. Tap. Right. Tap. Right. Tap, tap. But something was wrong. The tapping had migrated. It was no longer coming from the original location. Whatever was making the noise was deliberately moving along the side of his house. He muted the television. The silence in the house was suddenly deafening. The tapping ceased. For 20 agonizing minutes, he sat frozen, desperately trying to convince himself it was a raccoon or a stray cat. Then came a new sound. It was the same deliberate tapping, but the location made the boy's blood run cold. The living room sat directly above an unfinished basement. The tapping was coming from below him. It was striking the small, ground-level windows that looked out into the yard. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had to know. He crept off the couch and walked silently toward the basement door. He gripped the knob, turned it slowly, and stared down the wooden stairs into the pitch-black void. The tapping was louder now. Consistent. Intentional. Driven by a naive, childlike impulse, he called out into the darkness. Hello. The tapping stopped instantly. A wave of pure dread washed over him. A raccoon doesn't stop knocking when you speak to it. A human does. He desperately wanted to turn on the basement lights, but the switch was located at the very bottom of the stairs. Like, there was absolutely no way he was descending into that darkness. He needed to see what was down there without exposing himself. He pulled the basement door shut, leaving only a tiny crack. He grabbed his old, bulky cell phone, engaged the camera, and turned on the bright LED flash. He stuck his hand through the crack, pointed the lens down toward the basement windows, squeezed his eyes shut, and hit record for just a few seconds. He yanked his arm back, slammed the door shut, and threw the deadbolt lock. Breathing heavily, He pulled up the grainy video on his phone's small screen. It only took 1 second for his reality to completely shatter. Illuminated by the harsh glare of the camera flash, standing directly beneath the basement window, on the inside of the house, was the unmistakable figure of a man. The boy screamed. He abandoned all attempts at bravery, sprinting up the stairs to his bedroom, locking the door, and frantically calling his father, who immediately dispatched the police. While he was still on the phone, the nightmare escalated. The intruder realized he had been spotted. The boy heard heavy, violent footsteps bounding up the basement stairs. A massive bang shook the house. The intruder was hurling his body against the locked basement door, desperately trying to break into the main living area. Bang. After the 6th violent impact, the house fell deathly silent. Sirens wailed in the distance. When the police finally breached the home, they discovered the basement window had been smashed outward. The intruder had fled into the night. The officers conducted a thorough sweep of the unfinished basement. Several items were missing, but one discovery chilled the officers to the bone. In the corner of the basements, at a small, dusty kitchenette, the police inspected the knife block on the counter. The largest, heaviest butcher knife was gone. The man hadn't just broken into the basement to steal. He had armed himself. And if that 14-year-old boy had walked down those stairs to flip the light switch, he would have walked directly into the blade. To this day, the man in the flash video was never identified. The Rustle in the Dark. Our third narrative takes us into the heart of a massive, heavily customized suburban home. The narrator was a 16-year-old boy whose parents had transformed their sprawling basement into an ultimate hangout space. It featured a plush sectional couch, a massive television, and several deep storage rooms tucked away in the back. Because his parents rarely ventured downstairs, the basement was effectively his personal kingdom. There were 2 crucial quirks to this house. First, the family owned an aggressively friendly cat named Rocky, who was routinely locked in the basement overnight so he wouldn't disturb the sleeping parents upstairs. Second, the basement featured a heavy interior that connected directly to the attached garage. For the parents, it was a convenient way to carry in groceries. For a 16-year-old boy, it was the perfect clandestine entrance for sneaking friends into the house. It was a Friday night. The boy had invited a girl named Madeline over for a late-night movie. They were lounging on the sectional couch in the basement, bathed in the glow of the television. It was well past the hour his parents usually banished Rocky downstairs. The boy simply assumed the cat was already down there, likely curled up asleep in one of the dark storage rooms. That is why he didn't panic when he heard the first noise. It was a faint, distinct rustling sound echoing from the black depths of the storage room. It sounded exactly like an animal digging through cardboard boxes. Madeline jumped slightly, but the boy confidently reassured her that it was just his hyperactive cat. They returned their attention to the movie. But the noises didn't stop. Every few minutes, the silence was broken by a soft thud, the scrape of a box being shifted, or a heavy rustle. Each time, Madeline threw him a terrified glance. Each time, he doubled down on the lie, assuring her that Rocky simply loved to climb on things in the dark. He genuinely believed his own excuse. He was completely calm. Right up until the moment he heard a very specific, agonizingly clear sound coming from directly above them. S.C. Rich. Light. Scratch. Light. S.C. Rich. It was coming from the door at the very top of the basement stairs, the door leading to the main floor of the house. The boy's blood turned to ice. He knew that sound intimately. It was Rocky. The cat was upstairs, scratching at the door, begging to be let down into the basement. The math was horrificously simple. If the cat was upstairs, what the hell had been moving around in the dark storage room for the past 30 minutes? He sat frozen on the couch, terrified to speak, terrified to alarm Madeline. But he didn't have to. Madeline suddenly let out a blood-curdling, ear-piercing scream. The boy whipped his head around. Madeline was trembling violently, her finger pointed directly over his shoulder toward the pitch-black maw of the storage room. The boy slowly turned his head. Rolling to a stop on the carpet, directly in front of the storage room door, was a foam football. It hadn't fallen. The trajectory was clear. It had been deliberately tossed out of the darkness. Someone was standing in the shadows of the storage room, watching them. And they had been there the entire time. The boy didn't think. He grabbed Madeline by the arm, violently hauled her off the couch, and dragged her up the basement stairs. They burst through the door, nearly trampling the confused cat, and slammed the heavy wood shut, locking the deadbolt behind them. The house erupted into chaos. Madeline was weeping hysterically. The boy's parents, violently awakened by the screams, immediately dialed 911. While they waited for the sirens, the boy stationed himself on the back deck, keeping a hawkish, unbroken gaze on the garage door, the only viable exit the intruder could use. He watched it relentlessly. It never opened. The police arrived in minutes. They drew their weapons and conducted a massive, tactical sweep of the entire basement and the attached garage. They found nothing. The storage rooms were empty. There was absolutely no sign of forced entry on any of the basement windows, and every single pane of glass was locked securely from the inside. The baffled officers suggested that the intruder must have slipped out through the garage before they arrived. But the boy knew that was impossible. He had watched the garage exit like a hawk the entire time. No one had left. His parents, desperate for a rational explanation, accepted the police's theory. But the boy knows the terrifying truth. The intruder didn't escape through a window. He didn't escape through the garage. The family never found a resolution, and the boy is left with a horrifying, unanswerable question. If the intruder didn't leave the house, where did he go? The Ghost of Aunt Debbie. Our final story dives into the deep, murky waters of family secrets. Every child harbors an innate, primal fear of the basement. For this narrator, that fear was amplified tenfold. His childhood home featured a sprawling, subterranean level that housed the family's only video game console. Like a moth to a flame, the lure of the games frequently forced him down into the dark, despite his paralyzing fear. He was 9 years old, staying up late on a weekend to grind through a stubbornly difficult level on his PlayStation 1. The silence of the basement was oppressive, broken only by the digital hum of the television. To make matters worse, his basement featured a massive, windowless boiler laundry room. It was a cavernous space that remained pitch black at all hours of the day, groaning and hissing with the mechanical sounds of the house's plumbing. He hated that room. On this particular night, the mechanical groans of the boiler room were replaced by a sound that made his 9-year-old heart stop. Cree. Cree. The heavy wooden door of the laundry room slowly swung open on its own. The boy paused his game. A suffocating, heavy silence blanketed the basement. Then, echoing from the absolute blackness of the laundry room, came a sound that defied logic. It was the sound of a woman, moaning and groaning in a low, almost ghost-like register. But the sheer terror of the sound was immediately undercut by a buzz, a realization. The boy recognized the voice. It sounded exactly like his mother. Relief washed over him. He chuckled nervously, calling out, "Nice try, Mom." He assumed she was pulling a cruel prank to scare him upstairs to bed. Looking back, he realizes the absurdity of the assumption. His mother was a stoic, serious woman who despised practical jokes. But the mind of a child clings to whatever logic makes them feel safe. Emboldened by his false deduction, the boy stood up and walked toward the yawning, pitch-black doorway, of the laundry room. The groaning head stopped. He peered into the darkness. As his eyes struggled to adjust, a horrifying silhouette slowly materialized in the gloom. It was the distinct outline of a person, standing completely motionless in the center of the dark room. "Like, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling, the false confidence evaporating. He took one step closer. The figure shifted, and in that split second, the boy realized with absolute, terrifying certainty that the person standing in the dark was not his mother. He unleashed a blood-curdling scream, turned on his heel, and sprinted blindly up the wooden stairs. He burst into the living room, hyperventilating. His nightmare was instantly confirmed. Both his mother and his father were sitting on the living room couch, leaping to their feet in response to his screams. "There's a woman in the laundry room," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger back toward the basement door. His parents exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Like, they didn't ask questions. They didn't soothe him. They sprinted down the stairs, violently slamming the basement door shut behind them. The boy sat in the living room for what felt like hours, listening to muffled, frantic shouting echoing through the floorboards. When his mother finally emerged, her face was ashen. She ordered him to go directly to bed and asked no questions. The next morning, his parents delivered a clumsy, poorly constructed lie. They claimed they had hired a friend from out of state to hide in the basement and prank him. They laughed it off, treating the entire terrifying ordeal as a massive joke. The boy, desperate for the nightmare to be over, accepted the lie. But as he grew older, a name began slipping from his parents' lips during hushed arguments. Debbie. Whenever he asked who Debbie was, the subject was aggressively changed. At 14, the boy's curiosity morphed into an obsession. He stole his father's credit card and purchased access to a deep-dive genealogical website. He mapped his family tree. He discovered a shocking secret. His mother had a sister. Her name was Debbie. He frantically Googled the name alongside his mother's maiden name. The search engine spat back an obituary. Debbie was dead. Armed with the printout, he confronted his parents, demanding the truth. The color drained from his father's face. He looked at his wife and whispered, "Still tell him." His mother finally cracked. She revealed that her sister Debbie suffered from severe, dangerous mental instability. She vaguely, terrifyingly confessed that Debbie had harmed a lot of people. The family had taken extreme measures to keep her hidden and away from the boy. On that night, years ago, Debbie had broken into the house. She had bypassed the locks, crept into the basement, and hidden herself in the pitch-black laundry room, waiting in the dark while her 9-year-old nephew played video games just feet away. His parents refused to elaborate further. They took the horrific details of Debbie's crimes to the grave. The narrator is now an adult, left with a legacy of chilling, unanswerable questions. Why was she hiding in the basement? What was she planning to do to him? And, most disturbingly, how long had she been living down there in the dark before she finally pushed that door open? Some questions, he admits, are better left buried. Thank you for listening tonight. Remember, the true monsters don't always lurk in the woods or hide in abandoned buildings. Sometimes, they find a way inside. They find a dark corner, and they wait. Stay safe, and sleep with the lights on. I will see you all again very soon.